Egunon guztioi.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, better said, to all of you. And welcome to the official section of the film festival. And this is the press conference. Welcome, as I was saying, that corresponds to the co-production between Chile, France, Germany, and Greece, which is titled Jesús, which is projected within the official section of the festival. The film is presented by Fernando Guzzoni, who is the director, Nicolas Duran and Alejandro Goic, and the producers, Jacques Bidou, Marianne Dumoulin, and Giancarlo Nascin-Callas. So therefore, let's give the floor to whatever questions you may deem to ask.
From Germany, and I have a question which goes to the director. First, thank you very much. I thought this was a very powerful and also radical film. And I was wondering, well, it's obvious why father is going to the police, because he realizes that his own life will get into trouble. But on the other hand, you can say that this horrible crime his son committed offers a chance for the relationship between the father and the son. But still, in the end, he's betraying his son. Why did you let prevail this aspect over the story?
I will reply in Spanish, okay?
Well, okay, the film has, the intention of the film is to record the crisis of the relationship between this father and son, and how this filial and blood relationship is not necessarily translated into an effective and a loved relationship, and when this link happens through the radical crisis and this radical fact, which is quite extreme, both characters have to confront each other and have to confront this relationship. And that is where the film starts to reveal that the basis and the foundations of this link between them are not that strong. They are permeable, and this reaction, the reaction of the father, reveals the premise that this patriarchal figure, which is almost phantasmagorical or intermittent, that father figure is what provides identity, that recognizes you and gives you the surname, but also abandons you or finally can betray you. It has to do with the reflection that crosses the Latin American history, and in Chile specifically from La Colonia up until the present moment, and it has to do with the figure of the guacho, which is a word that Quechua word we use quite a lot, which has to do with orphanage of these children that are, or these boys that are orphans, and in generations of that period of time in the film, the relationship between father and son still has a lot of vice in it, and it's slanted, and there's not very deep. So therefore, basically, that's what it's all about. It's the feeling of this father of not wanting to take charge, on the one hand, of his son, and on the other hand, there's a sort of allegory or an analogy, if you deem, with a feeling that this father has a greater duty, a supreme duty that he has to carry out, as if it was the sacrifice of Isaac. In this case, that supreme duty responds to society, the duty of crossing a certain limit where the father doesn't want to take charge of his son. It's not an unconditional love. It's a responsibility that has a limit where it commits his own interests, when his own interests are jeopardized. No, no, de hecho, yo le quiero mucho. No, mi padre.
Siguiente pregunta.
He's watching the press conference. Come on.
ante todo,
Congratulations for the power behind in the film. Reminded me of the debut of Leonardo Fabio, the Chronicle of a Soul Child. I would like to know whether it's your first feature film and whether all of the characters are non-professional. That I might think perhaps the father is an actor. It's a professional actor. Is it your first feature film? And I would like to know what's the genesis of the project and how did you choose the actors, who are excellent, by the way. Well, this is my third film, my second fiction film. The first was called Carne de Perro, Dog Flesh, which was in this festival in 2012. Alejandro is an actor that's made more than 20 films. He's been in films like Noel Club. He was a protagonist in the previous film. To present him is almost obscene, because an obscenity, because he's done quite a lot of films, but perhaps they don't know who I am. The actor says, and Nicolas is an actor who he doesn't have an academic training to acting, but he's portrayed characters in 7 other films, and this is the first time he's the lead actor. And seeking the role of Jesús was very difficult, because it was very demanding from the physical and doctoral point of view. For example, it was quite complex in range, and I wanted the character to be 18 years old and not to be a 20-odd-year-old actor acting as an 18-year-old. So therefore, it represented a significant challenge to find that the actor. And the casting was, we saw over 400 actors for a period of 6 months, and I found Nicolas, and it was very interesting, a very courageous actor who understood that the film brought about a different type of effort from him, required a different type of effort, and also the spirit that I wanted to address in the film, he understood it quite well, and the result was very positive. There was a mixture with the non-actors that have to do with investigation that I carried out, research that I carried out, to enter into the urban tribes of this type of underworld that exists in Santiago, that have to do with the K-pop dancing gangs and boys and various young people that get together in a public park. And I didn't want to I didn't want to generate an exotic or touristic type of contemplation of these kids. So therefore, I crossed between actors and not actors, made a mixture of actors and not actors. And Nicolas had to take that type of dancing classes, but all of the boys that are there, they belong to that world. And it was very interesting. That made the story much more real, and it talks about how that and it drives the plot in the film. Above all, it was a challenge to dance K-pop, because I don't dance any type of dance. I've never gone to a discotheque, so therefore it was a great problem for me to do so. So the films that we're seeing in San Sebastian from Chile, practically all of them are based and inspired in real events. What is that about? Films in Chile look at reality, real events for filming. Well, we're very critical, and there's a social and political side of things. In Chile, documentaries has addressed big subjects and events that have to do with the recent political setup and fracture and breakdown. So therefore, to a greatest extent, I think in the last few years, we directors are connected to reality in the most extensive sense of the word. Chile is an unequal country. It's a country that gives you a lot of material, because it seems that it's a very good, positive and healthy economy, but there's a great amount of inequality and a capitalist side to it, with a neoliberal model which is deeply rooted and has entered into the different fabrics in society, and we could exploit that from many, many different ways. I think that the directors are undertaking that reality, and I think that's great that we do so. In my case, I observe quite obviously, I'm concerned about Chile. I feel very sensitive, and it provokes me to do something. And just like anyone, and I'm not interested in the official stories or whatever the official stories say, but I think it's interesting to address an issue and reinterpret it, and not do a pedagogical nor journalistic type of exercise, but to provide my own vision and to see my slant upon what I see. In this case, the film makes a nod to a real event that took place, which was the murder of a young boy at the hand of other 4 boys in a public park in Santiago de Chile, and the event was very violent and very brutal and very abject at the same time. And the victim was homosexual, and the media started to speculate whether they were neo-Nazis, the 4 boys, and immediately established a sort of a cliche label was given to them, a definition, but established a difference between the good and the bad, and it set up a sort of barrier between the citizens and these sociopaths that the press talked about. I carried out some research, and I was able to investigate and find people very close to the culprits, and all of a sudden I realized that they weren't neo-Nazis, but it was much deeper, it was much more painful, and that even these 4 the victims and these 4 boys came from the same social class, and they knew each other. They were sort of hung out in the same places, and the murderers as well as the victim had the absence of a father or a paternal figure, which was a little bit intermittent, which is what made me mix up these 2 initial interests that I had to make the film, and that's what it's about. If we look up at listen to the official story, but that's a bit boring. I'm bored with official cinema, and what I find is interesting is to dig deeper and to see that there are a lot of gray. There's a lot of gray there. That things are much more complex, and to get naked vis-a-vis in a film in that respect, and I think that's very interesting when one makes films. I believe that, in particular, with what you've highlighted and what you mentioned as the connection with real events, I think that in my case, these 4 murderers were quickly labeled by the press, and when they were investigated, things emerged that generated or caused a certain pain in myself, because at the end of the day, this crime is not a crime for revenge. It's not an ideological crime. There was no motive of any type of hate. It was just people who were in the same class, and so it was like fratricide and brothers who were killing each other. And so when we talked with Alejandro, it was like the failure of the people, very sad and very and I can't justify a murder because of the struggle of classes. We can understand, but you can understand something of that nature. But in this case, such is not the case. So therefore, I think that when these things happen, it's necessary to look at them and to show them and to observe them. Next question, please. I'm sorry for the interpreters. How is the distribution going to be happening in other countries across the Andes Mountains? Because very little Chilean films can be seen in Argentina, and I imagine it's vice versa. I think the great problem with the Latin Americas is we don't consume our cinema, other types of cinema, and this is subject to the rules of distribution, no matter how much effort is carried out. In Chile, 85% of the screens are taken by the American major studios, so therefore 15% is divided between Chilean films and films from everywhere else in the world. And I think that's the big cancer that films have nowadays. On the one hand, homologating it to culture and how the audience come to cinema theaters as due to a formula which is set up by the American film industry, and on the other hand, this monopoly of the major American studios means that there's no room and it's unfeasible for distributors to put on the screens other types of cinema and films, and also for the producers it's a pain in the, it's a headache to compete with the big major studios. But I think that the producers here have their own thesis vis-a-vis this or point of view, but that's the way I see things. I think that beyond the will, personal will, there are state policies that are not protectionist vis-a-vis culture or films in particular. I think that's the big debt we have, that the ministries of culture and the cultural apparatus, because we filmmakers can only make it to a certain level and we can't really do much more. We make an effort. Trade unions and producers and distributors associations do efforts, and they're trying to find formulas to solve it, but it's insufficient unless we have the government backing us. Can I speak in French? Si. Yes. Yes, obviously I would like to thank Fernando and Alejandro and Nicolas. Thank you very much for this very beautiful film. And I would like to say that with San Sebastian, we started this journey with Dog Flesh that received an award, which was a magnificent film. And now we're back in San Sebastian. So therefore, thank you very much to this festival that has shown us with another, we're going to accompany him. I want to, as well, I want to thank, and you can't imagine that this film has been made with a very small budget. Chile has participated, that's provided a lot. Constanza knows this, but also France and Germany and Greece and Italy and even Colombia. It's delirious, isn't it, with such a small budget, but this just represents that Fernando has carried out an incredible advantage with Titus, with Constanza, with Irini, and with Georges, and with Diana, and with Giancarla also. So therefore, I would like to say that it's unimaginable, isn't it? 5 countries, and plus I've forgotten Italy. I think Italy has also contributed something significant through El Torino Film Lab. It has contributed as well. So therefore, there's a whole mosaic there. But as there's a lot of great talent everywhere, this mosaic is not only going to be a meeting of predators, but also of true film fans. Whether it was difficult was it difficult for you to dance, to do the tougher scenes of the films as well? I imagine you had no experience. Could the director? He was a virgin, in fact. Yes. Well, mainly I lost my virginity with Mr. Guzzoni, and then things got easier. No, it wasn't that difficult. It was much more difficult to dance, the truth be said. To be very sincere, I don't have too many inhibitions, so they were not apart from the fact that the sexual intercourse with a girl was my first girlfriend. So it was my girlfriend at that time, so therefore there wasn't any drama there. There was a lot of confidence between both of us. What was more difficult was the scene, homosexual sex. Yes, that was very powerful. That was very hard. And I had to investigate. I've got several gay friends, and I talked to them all to know what happens in that sense, what to do. But that's it. It wasn't difficult at an inhibition level, but we wanted to show that it was real, for it to feel very real. Yes, that's right. We had to stop them. We had to stop them continuing. Once I start, I just don't stop. There's no way back. And also, the editing room cut out a lot as well. And in fact, both scenes were much more powerful than you see in the screen. So you can imagine what happened there. I would like to add something as regards to the sex scene that I understand could be quite tough in the film because it's very explicit sex, but And there's a reason behind it. And it serves the story, because when I investigated upon this, and from what I've seen and the conversations with Nicolas and other boys his age, is that sex, there's no political statement vis-a-vis sexuality as regards to saying, I'm bisexual, homosexual, or pansexual, or whatever you want, but it's more a relationship with one's body, that it's linked to another body in search of affection, desire, or love or pleasure. And these definitions sound a bit very clearly marked with these boys, and I wanted to show this in the film. And therefore, these sexual encounters occur in public spaces because they've got no intimate spaces in their own houses. So the parks operate as a sort of a place where they identify and meet and generate spaces for identity. They drink and take drugs, they dance and sex, and they can commit a crime. So that's what the film says, to graphically show sex in a public place, disinhibited, because there's no problem, moral problem with that. And also because genital sex is genital sex, and it was good to see this, because I think it's, in no sense is it anything ugly, nor is it a skin, or nor is it obscure. And the same with the relationship with his friend. It's a body that you're looking forward to achieve desire and pleasure. We were subjected quite brutally to the imposition of a neoliberal system which was extreme. Prior, the great model, shall we say, Michael Friedman went to Chile, for example, and they imposed, through the military dictatorship, this brutal model. One of the consequences, first of all, in its best expression, and it's going to leave at least a third of the population outside the system. The system doesn't work with this social detritus that are marginalized and taboo and are completely socially excluded. In Chile, as it was imposed, the neoliberalism was imposed like a laboratory prior to Thatcher, Reagan, and that period, and in Europe. But one of the things, there is a brutal individualism here. It's not the healthy individualism of the political philosophies of the 19th century and individual freedom, but that of absolute solitude. And I think this act that you see in these marginal, excluded areas are gigantic in Chile. It seems, you see, it's a beautiful system that works, and it's very well balanced, economically speaking, and so on. There's a great margination of people. There's great differences in social and economic differences that are quite incredible, quite simply speaking. One of the consequences of this cultural neoliberalism is a brutal solitude, and a way of not being alone is with this anxious sex, which is full and complete, and it's a way of seeking in the sector of these young people that are marginalized and socially excluded to seek this deep love. I think this scene should be seen, this explicit sex scene, as a search, a desperate search to palliate that infinite solitude of the soul. It's a search, the only search, because these are pariahs from a social standpoint. They're not winners. And it's also a search for my generation, to get rid of all the possible taboos. Like Fernando says, there's something, I believe, there's no, lesbian, homosexual, bisexual, whatever. It doesn't matter. I hope we finish that. That they don't exist. We want to know everything. We want to live what's happening, and that's all. We're losing that more and more. So welcome to the orgy later on. Can we close and switch off the cameras? Switch the lights off. I've got problems with my body. I don't like to look at my body. Okay. And the Hotel Londres, room 402. Next question, please.
Bueno, enhorabuena por...
Okay, congratulations for the film because it's very courageous, and we want to thank that courage and the festival also who has waged in favor of showing this film, because the truth is, yesterday we saw a Polish film which has been seen on the social media. It was critical because at the end there was nihilism vis-a-vis shown in some of the scenes of the film, or some of us saw that it didn't produce anything. But in this case, I think it's a film which is very courageous and undoubtedly provides a lot. So therefore, I would like to ask Fernando, as regards to the time, how long have you taken to complete the project, and then with the production companies that you've helped, and what's going to happen with distribution, because there's a foundational problem there. It'll probably come more to the European market, but in the European market it's going to be complicated. I consider the same. I consider as well. Well, okay, the complete process of the film, it was 3 years from the writing of the script to the end of the shooting of the film. And with Jack and Marianne, we have been working with them since 2010 together, and with Giancarlo almost 3 years now, from 2 to 3 years, and then we incorporated partners who, apart from having an economic participation, had an artistic participation, like our partner from Germany and Colombia and Greece. And there was also work to model the financial structure and to give it shape, and allowing the artistic process to continue, and doing production in certain places, and generating as well an artistic collaboration between the countries, not only an economic link. So therefore, vis-a-vis distribution, I believe that obviously the film will have certain complexities in terms of sex scenes or violence, but I think it's also a film that appeals to great issues, important issues. As a film that addresses a very archetypal subject matter, which is the relationship between father and son, and it includes global sensitivities and universal sensitivities which are in our collective imaginary. So therefore, it can generate a significant connection with the audiences. And we were in the Toronto Film Festival a while ago, and we were very surprised how the audience received it, apart from the critics, which was very good, but the reaction of the audiences was they understood the message of the film quite well. And I think that can be a good symptom. Let's see what happens here. Whether the distributors shouldn't be afraid when they see films that are a bit more, a bit harsher. It has a narrative function that appeals to people's emotions. It's not a film which is closed in any way or sealed off. I have a lot of faith, but let's see how that works in the. I know where the countries where. I don't know what's happening commercially in the countries where it's been premiered. I think Jean-Marie and Giancarlo probably know more than me, but that's all I can say. Well, in whatever the case, to produce this film for us has been a struggle. It's been a fight. But all of the partners, we had the will of allowing this author to be known. That's our task, that's our work. It's not mercantile. Distribution is going to be difficult in all countries, be it in Germany as well as in Chile, because the film is quite radical. It's quite clear. The film confronts a part, and plus it's got to go and confront the big majors, commercially speaking, even more so. But producing together, we've generated a force, and we shouldn't give in. We have to continue to fight for this film to be seen, the presence of Fernando in film festivals, and Nicolas and Alejandro is of essential importance. Those voices, we have to continue to make sure that they can be heard, and the power of festivals is a determining factor. If the film is here, and that's very, very important, for that circuit of festivals is of essential importance. And we, on our behalf, are going to contribute, work hand in hand with Fernando, because we believe, and I sense it's very important, not only for our own generation, but for future generations as well. Any further questions?
Hola, ¿qué tal?
Hi. How are you? How can I say what I'm going to say? I thought it was a fantastic film. It's the best I've seen so far. I haven't seen a lot of them, but what I've seen so far, it's the best film from my point of view. But throughout the entire story, seeing that I had moral doubts vis-a-vis what you propose. It's very risky from the point of view of the victim, of the victimary, that is to say the murderers, one of them at least anyway. As a director, I am as well with 2 films here in San Sebastian, and homosexual at the same time. I ask you, and the victim, where does the victim, where does he end up in the film? The punishment is quite clear to me, and the point of view I understand, but I'm lacking what happens to the victim at the end. Well, I understand your apprehension here, and I think it's a very interesting question what you're asking. I think that when one observes a story at a macro level, there are many different slants and perspectives that can be taken. And when I address the idea of not generating an official story, it had to do with I extract elements arbitrarily with the infinite license of fiction, and I choose a slant and perspective, and I choose a direction. And in that direction, the victim for me was a body that was used in a game that ended up being a dead body. But we're talking about a body here. My reflection is put upon the culprits. That say, my perspective there was to observe that in the press, you generate a myopic and a reductionist perspective vis-a-vis something that's so much more painful and deeper. So therefore, I thought it was of great caution to address it from that perspective, and also to say that those young people that I had researched upon had a lack of affection, and as Alejandro said, they suffer this context of this castrating, excluding neoliberal Chile, and at a given moment, I believe that violence, that underground violence, day-to-day underground violence, erupts. And I think in the generation of Alejandro, for example, where there was a tyrant that you had to confront, which was visible in our generations, for example, have lived through the figure of the invisible tyrant, and that are still there in the social fabric of our country, but they have to do with this model that I'm talking about, politically speaking. I think that the film is going to generate a certain sensitivity because it appeals to this gay crime. But I think that in any way, whatever the case, albeit it doesn't specifically say so in the story, one can reflect that way upon what happens to the victim. But as I said beforehand, at the end of the day, the most terrifying thing of all of this is that they kill each other and their brothers, and that's the most painful thing, I believe. And I think it also collides and bothers people because we're used to observing in films how violence is so banal or banalized that have to do with a Rambo that picks up a machine gun and he kills Vietnamese people or blows them up. But when we see violence that is much closer to us, which we have suffered or we have seen it, or we are in our family or in our neighborhood, that really moves you because it's much closer to you, because we understand it or we recognize it, and plus it's much more comfortable to a unilateral explanation of an ideological or or a homophobic approach, that is to say, which was what happened in Chile. It's much more uncomfortable to say that there are hundreds and thousands of young people that are the production of other reasons of their own existence, that say of the lack of opportunities that they have, of having no destination, of their solitude and loneliness. All of them are eventual, shall we say, criminals, and this is difficult to swallow and to accept. I think that's the value and that's the courage. But the victim is always present, that is to say. It's very personal, nevertheless, but at the end of the day, through punishment, moral punishment of the relationships that exist, I, the father, really pick up and the victim and to hand in the murderers and to say they're Nazis. No, we feel comfortable there because it obeys to a certain ideology. They're neo-Nazis, they're quite clear and it's ideological. We're homophobic because that's all clearly established. No, and that's it. No, it's full of these young people, and tomorrow in Chile and in Latin America and these societies where there's any social exclusion and margination, that's going to take place, that's going to happen. I understand that I'm referring more to the victim, the absence of the victim, independent of whether he was gay or a woman or a girl or whatever. It's just simply the absence. It's true that you pick him up at the end, and that last scene makes me feel much more comforting vis-a-vis the film. I'm not indignant or bothersome, but it was a bit doubtful vis-a-vis the morality of what you were offering me, but I felt much more relaxed with that final sequence, and I was referring more to the absence, to how you treat the victim with a body. Yes, that's the idea. At the end of the day, the film reflects upon the body that's eroticized, alcoholic, drugged, or dead body. It's a reflection upon this. That's why I say that the victim was a body, and it was a deliberate decision, obviously, on my behalf. I don't enter into the life of the victim, and just how violence emerges from a kid's game and it turns into a brutal act of violence. But I think, because the point of view follows the murderers, but it has to do with the narrative decisions that I've included in the story. Hi again. I'd like to ask whether, and Nicolas, for example, he said something which is very interesting of the issue of new generations, that is how bisexuality, and this is something that's quite standardized or quite normal, and through a film that's now being watched in San Sebastian, and we're now talking about, precisely the director talks about the need for Chile to see legalize homosexual marriages and what that means, but not at the level of something frivolous, but that they can have children, and that should be standardized and regulated. The generation that you're talking about is not only sexuality, the issue of sexuality as something hedonistic, but we also see that normal, that those couples can have children, they can be normal, regular, and there's room for them in societies. That yes, absolutely. I think that, and I talk on behalf of the majority of people in my generation, we all want that change. We all want to stop bothering and hassling everyone. That is to say, let the people be free, live and let live, basically. It's as simple as that. I think that that's what we all want, and that's why there are so many demonstrations and rallies, and I don't know, I think that that's what we're all thinking. At least that's the way I see it, and that's my friends see it, and that's what I also expect and hope. I would like to add, as regards this issue, that it's along the lines of what I addressed before vis-a-vis these definitions, political terms, and to make sexuality and so on and so forth. I don't know in depth what is the position of that youth, whether it can be quantified or not. But my feeling is that in sexual terms, as there is these stigmas and labels and cliches are overcome, it's seen very naturally as well the possibility of having single-parent families. And this I can see this in my generation as well. And I can also see it here with European friends, because in Chile it's a bit more taboo, of friends who decide to have a gay man or a lesbian or a heterosexual woman. It's all the same to me, because I think that the generations, the up-and-coming generations, are naturalizing this. That is to say, at the eyes of the past generation would have been a scandal. I would just like to say, vis-a-vis what Pepe Sarmantin says of bisexual, homosexual marriage, depending on what point you have, is that the law is not equal to everyone. It's done in a democratic state and a state of law, and the law discriminates. It's only for one part of the population. The other part of the population is controlled by another law. Is simply a scandal or scandalous. And it also has to do with, unfortunately, an issue that my country is under a level of Catholicism. That is to say, that's the most difficult. That's the big reason why several things aren't legal in Chile and are a stupidity. You said you were Catholic when you did the casting. No, I believe in God or something or whatever, or an energy. But I think that Catholicism per se is getting rid of, is eliminating a lot of the freedoms that seem more than natural to all of us, or normal. Any further questions? Okay, end of the press conference. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.